All right, Shabbosai, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors. Thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Tammuz. Rabbi Naftali Tilson of Telmond, Yishaya for dedicating all the Shimon Joshos this month in commemoration of the yahrzeit of his dear parents, Rabbi Yona ben Avraham, Leyb, and Rivka bas Ya'akov. We hope that in the merit, and of course in the merit of all of us continuing to learn the Daf in Meretz Hashem, till we finish the cycle Bekarav. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD TORAH, the Neshama Slavin Aliyah, and the family Einachama. To thank our week of learning sponsors, Binyamin Fleischman, in memory of his father, Rabbi Shmuel Silber ben Avraham Ya'akov, Yehuda and Jennie Goodhart, Le'ilui Nishmas Yishaya Zalman ben Lazer, and Leah Sol, in honor of the upcoming marriage of Rabbi Silber and Zeesy Frankel, and Binyamin Ilana Levin, in honor of the birth of a granddaughter, Liora Sarah Levin. We thank all of our sponsors for their incredible generosity. Beautiful, beautiful combination of milestones of the past, milestones of the future. And with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Lamed Ches 38. And we are picking up in Meretz Hashem. We have a lot to do today at the Mishnah on Lamed Zayin Amud Beis. The Mishnah is 37b. We'll say a new topic. Eved Shenishba Upadua. We'll say if you have an Eved Kinani. So remember again, Eved Kinani is a non-Jewish servant who, upon being taken as a servant to a Jew, always, it's interesting because Eved, of course, really translates as slave. We're often reticent to use the word slave because generally slavery has such a negative connotation. But the truth is, we've seen so much throughout Shas to recognize that halacha protects the interests of the Eved Kinani, the non-Jewish slave, in such dramatic ways. So again, sometimes it just feels a little bit more comfortable to use the word servant. But this is a non-Jewish servant. So now what happens? The non-Jewish servant, the Eved Kinani, runs away. He runs away. And what happens? Upadua. And then he is redeemed. Now, both say the case over here is he is redeemed by another Jew. So let's say, for example, Eved Kinani is owned by Reuven. Eved Kinani runs away, and Shimon redeems him. So in other words, he runs away, he's taken captive by someone else, and ultimately, again, Shimon, now a second Jew, redeems him. So what's the halacha? Imlushum ben chorin, upadua. Imlushum Eved yishtabed. If he's redeemed by Shimon, Jew number 2, for the sake of servitude, then ultimately, again, he comes back to servitude. Imlushum ben chorin, if he's redeemed ultimately in order to be a free person, then ultimately, again, lo yishtabed. Then he cannot be re-enslaved. Rabbi Shmuel says, benkach yishtabed. Shmuel says, no. Regardless, once he is redeemed, by definition, he returns back to servitude. So we'll say very interesting machlokes. Tanakama essentially saying that the status of the servant is dependent on what the intent was when he was redeemed. Rabbi Shmuel saying, no. So intention is irrelevant. At the end of the day, when he is redeemed, he automatically goes back to servitude. Good. Let's analyze. Mayaskinon. What's the case, says the Gemara? Ilema lifnei yeyosh. So I'll say, if we're talking about, I will say, remember, so Reuven owns this Eved Kinani. Eved Kinani runs away. Shimon is one who's redeeming him. So I will say, the Gemara says, what's the case? And really what the case is very much dependent on the mindset of Reuven, the original master. If it's lifnei yeyosh, I will say, remember again, so what's yeyosh? Yeyosh means essentially you give up hope, right? Despair. Now, we're not talking about a state, an emotional state, right? But rather, again, a halachic state. When the Eved runs away, does Reuven have intention of getting him back or not? So if Reuven has intention, that's called lifnei yeyosh, prior to despair. If Reuven does not have intention, that's achar yeyosh. So if we're talking about that Reuven has not yet given hope of reclaiming his servants, then l'shum ben chorin amai lo yishtabed. I don't understand. So if that's supposed that if it's lifnei yeyosh, so even if Shimon, second Jew, redeems the Eved Kinani for the sake of emancipation, why wouldn't he still be a slave? The first owner has not yet had yeyosh. He hasn't given up hope of retrieving him. Ella achar yeyosh. Rather, it must be talking about a case where Reuven has already experienced yeyosh. If that's the case, if that's the case, then ultimately, even if Shimon redeems the servant for the sake of servitude, if it's after yeyosh, servant should go free. Abai says, no. The olam lifnei yeyosh, we're talking about a case of lifnei yeyosh. Therefore, again, Lushum Eved Yishtabed L'Rabo Rishon. So therefore, again, I will say, if he's redeemed, ultimately again for servitude, therefore, Halacha L'Maisi goes back to his first master. Lushum Ben Chorin Lo Yishtabed Lo L'Rabo Rishon V'Lo L'Rabo Sheni. But if Shimon redeems the Eved for the sake of emancipation, he does not return to servitude to master 1 or to master 2. Why not? L'Rabo Sheni Lo Dahalushem Ben Chorin Parke. He doesn't go, say first wide line in the bottom of Lam and Zayin and base. He doesn't go to the second master because the second master, right, Shimon, redeemed him ultimately again for emancipatory purposes. L'Rabba Rishon Amilo Dilma Memani Velo Parki. But he doesn't go back to Rabba Rishon either. Why not? Because we'll say since it's Liachar Yeush, ultimately again, Lifnei Yeush, ultimately again the first master may not actually want to redeem him. Okay, so we'll say that's the first approach of Abaye. Reb Shimon Gamliel says, Reb Shimon Gamliel Omer, Ben Kach Ben Kach Yishtabed. Whatever, or as we'll say, the intent of Shimon when he redeems the Eved Kanani is absolutely irrelevant. Either way, this Eved is going back to servitude. Why? Kasaver kishem shemitzvah liftos es b'nei chorin, kach mitzvah liftos es ha'avodim. So I will say this is very interesting. To get into the psychology here a little bit, why would the intention of Shimon play a role in this at all? So I will say what's driving all of this is as follows. Do people feel a mandate to redeem an Eved Kanani who has been taken into captivity? Right? After all, again, I will say, on one hand, he's quasi-Jewish, right? There's like a little bit of Jewish. He's an Eved. He's an Eved to a Jew, which endows him with some Judaic identity, and certainly upon emancipation, he becomes a full-fledged Jew. On the other hand, he's not a Ben Chorin. So Rabbi Shimon holds that halacha l'maaseh people feel a moral mandate to go ahead and redeem even an Eved Kanani. And therefore, halacha l'maaseh will say that's why Rabbi Shimon in the Mishnah says, that no matter what, when you redeem this Eved Kanani, he's going back to servitude. And don't worry about it. People will still redeem him. Why? Because Rabbi Shimon holds the same way that there is a mitzvah of pidyon shvuyim to redeem captives by free people. Then ultimately, again, there is a mitzvah to redeem avodim kinanim, who are the property, the servants of Jews as well. Incredible. Rava says, no. Leolam le'achar Yehush. Rava chooses to set up the case of both says after Yehush. So Ruvain, the original owner, has despaired of retrieving his Eved Kanani. Ulashum Eved Yishtabed L'Rabo Sheni. And therefore, again, if the Eved is redeemed ultimately again for servitude purposes, he becomes the servant of Shimon, the guy who redeems him. We call him, we'll say, by the way, in this case, we're calling the second master, right? The first master is Ruvain. Who's the second master? In this case, the second master is Shimon, the guy who's redeeming the Eved Kanani. So therefore, again, it's after Yehush, and therefore, again, if he's redeemed for captivity purposes, for servitude purposes, he'll go to Shimon, Lushum Ben Chorim, but if he's redeemed to be a free man, Lo Yishtabi, Lo L'Rabo Rishon, Lo L'Rabo Sheni. Then ultimately, again, he's emancipated. He's fully emancipated. L'Rabo Sheni Lo, he doesn't go to the second master. Why? The Lushum Ben Chorim Parke, because Shimon redeemed him to be a free man. L'Rabo Rishon Nami Lo, the Hala Achar Yehushava. He won't go to the first master either. Why? Because ultimately, again, it's after Yehush. So both say, this is actually a very cohesive approach. So again, Rav is saying, the case, here's let's just frame it. Ruvain owns an Eved Kanani. Eved Kanani runs away. Ruvain has Yehush, right? He does not have any hope of reclaiming his Eved Kanani. Shimon comes along and redeems the Eved Kanani for what purpose? L'shum ben Chorin, for the sake of emancipation. So now when Shimon redeems him, the Eved is not going to be a servant to Shimon. Why? Because Shimon redeemed him for emancipatory purposes. He's also not going to go back to Ruvain. Why? Because it's Achar Yehush. It's Achar Yehush. That's the interpretation of Rav in the Mishnah. What about Rabbi Shmuel? Remember, Rabbi Shmuel in the Mishnah says, no matter for what your intention is when you redeem me, he always goes back to servitude. Rabbi Shmuel Omer ben kach yishtabein ki dechizkiya. What is Chizkiya? Say the Amr Chizkiya. Mipnei ma amru ben kach yishtabein. Why is it that according to Rabbi Shmuel, according to Chizkiya, no matter what the intent is of Shimon when he redeems the Eved Kanani, the Eved is always going back to servitude. Why does he say that? It is incredible. Shelo yehei kol echad ve'echad holech umafil asmo l'gayasos umafkiyo asmo miyad rabo. I will say, Rabbi Shmuel says I will say this is a little bit of the time. It's like a tikkun olam piece over here. So I will say, if an Eved knows that he could run away, be redeemed, and be redeemed for emancipation, then what have you just done? You've incentivized Avadim Kinanim to run away. Because then what's going to happen? Run away, right? Stay out of sight for a while. Let your first master have Yeosh. Second master will redeem you, hopefully more for emancipatory purposes, and you're free. You've created an incentive for Avadim to run away. Therefore, again, Rabbi Shmuel disincentivizes, Avadim running away by essentially saying no matter how you are redeemed, halacha l'maaseh, you're going back to servitude. Incredible. So I'll say, so just this position of Rav is kind of going to be our guiding light over here for the next little bit. I was going to question it, but just to, so you know how we're setting up the case. Ruvain owns an Eved Kanani. Eved Kanani runs away. Ruvain has Yeosh. He gives up hope of retrieving the Eved. Shimon redeems the Eved. Ultimately, again, Shimon redeems the Eved for emancipatory purposes. In that case, Eved goes free. Why? Because again, it was Shimon's intent to set him free, and Ruvain already had Yeosh. So there's no master to go back to. That's the position of Tanakama. Rabbi Shmuel says, no. When you redeem that Eved, he always goes back to servitude. Servitude of who? Servitude of first master, because if it's not that way, then you're incentivizing Avadim to run away, because running away will be a mechanism for them to find freedom, to find emancipation. Good. So Meisvei, Gemara is the Kasha. Amar Lahan, Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel says, Kashim shemitzvah liftos es b'nei chorin kach mitzvah liftos es Avadim. Rabbi Shmuel said the same way that there is a mitzvah to redeem free people, there is a mitzvah to redeem Avadim. So Bishlam la Abaye. So according to Abaye, this makes sense. The Amar Lefnei Yeosh, who says that all of this is happening before Yeosh, right? The Eved is being redeemed before Ruvain had Yeosh. Hainu de Amar Kishem. That's why the lashon is Kishem. El Rava de Amar la'achar Yeosh. But according to Rava, who says it's happening after Yeosh, Hai Kishem. What do you mean Kishem? Mishum de Chizkiyahu. As we just said before, his whole position is based on Chizkiyah. Amar l'cha Rava, Rabbi Shmuel Niel lo havi yadi mai kami Rabbana. The reality is Rabbi Shmuel Niel did not know the core position of the Rabbana, of the Tanakama. And therefore, this is what he was saying. Vachi kamarlu. Ilif neyeosh kamrisu hainu kashem. See, if you're setting up the case, ultimately again with neyeosh, then it'll be like this. Ila achar yeosh. If it's after yeosh, ultimately again like Chizkiah. Good. Or the Rava, damar la achar yeosh. So it's like according to Rava, who sets up the case, which was the last position we saw, that it's after yeosh. Ul rabo sheni. Right? We'll say, so if it's according to Rava, and it's after Yeosh, so we'll say, so ultimately again, and therefore, halacha l'maisa, remember, according to Rava, if the second master, if Shimon does redeem the Eved for servitude purposes, then ultimately again, the second master, Shimon, gets to keep the Eved, right? Because first master, Reuven, already had Yeosh. Here's the Shaila Rabbi say, Rabbi Shini Liman Kanile. He'll say, who is Shimon acquiring the Eved from? To which the Gemara says, Bimin Shabai. So ultimately, from the captors, Shabai Gufei Mi Kanile, but do the captors themselves actually acquire the Eved? In Kanile Maisi Yadav. Yes, they acquire the Eved, I will say, not as much that the captors acquire the guf of the Eved, but rather the captors acquire ultimately again the earning powers, right? The Maisi Adayim, the earnings, the production, what the Eved produces. Damrish Lakish, Minayin Ovid Kochav, Shekana as Ovid Kochav, Maisi Yadav. So also here's what's interesting. One Gentile cannot own the body of another Gentile. But what could happen over here is one Ovid Kochav, one Gentile could own the earning capacity, the Maisi Adayim, the earnings, the product that he produces. How do we know that? Shneamar, Vegam b'bnei toshavim hagarim imachem, mehem tiknu. Pasuk says, we'll say, speaking about the idea, we'll say, we're going to see the idea that from the Torah perspective, the Torah would rather that a Jew possesses an Eved Kanani than an Eved Ivri. That's what we would prefer. That's what we prefer. So the Pasuk says, therefore, from amongst the Gentiles that you live, from amongst the Gentiles you live among, so mehem tiknu, acquire from them. Atem kone mehem, so we'll say you could acquire them, top of Lameches, velohem kone mikem. But I will say, ultimately, again, a Gentile cannot own a Jew. A Gentile cannot own a Jew, right? So a Jew could own an Eved Kanani, but ultimately, again, a Gentile cannot own a Jew. Now, obviously, where do these halachas take effect? Right? These halachas take effect in a Jewish-governed society. So therefore, again, the Jewish governed society, so a Jew could own an Eved Kanani. But let's say a Canaanite, a Gentile, cannot own a Jew. Let's say I'll just point out something incredible. Do you want to know the secret to the nitzchis of Klal Yisrael? Why is it that we're here? Why is it that we're here today? After thousands of years of persecution. Right? You want to say, even have to go back to 1,000 years of persecution. They're just the tragic events that unfolded in Eretz Yisrael, right outside of Eli. Right? How is it that Klal Yisrael is not broken from all of these events throughout thousands of years of persecution? And I will say the answer is because no one could ever own the Jew. That's really what it comes down to. People could persecute us, people could kill us, people could hurt us, people could maim us. You can't own us. The only entity in the world which could ever own a Jew, which could ever own a Yid, is the Ribono Shel Olam. Everyone else could exert control. Everyone else could go in and exert some level of control over me. Control can happen, but not ownership. So because of that personalistic autonomy, because at the end of the day, and I belong to me and I belong to my God. Those are the only two entities who have any level of ownership over me. There's an inner freedom, and that inner freedom manifests itself in the constant and consistent survival of Klal Yisrael. I would say, remember again, you look what's happening in Eretz Yisrael right now. I would say, in the all right, they call it the settlement movement, but you know what? It is like a phrase that is so profound that every single time, as you see this, what happens every single time someone is killed? So what's the response? Building. There's a phrase, Bevinyana tenachamena. We will be consoled through building. We'll be consoled. In other words, you take something from us, we'll just create more. Bevinyana tenachamena. You take something from us, we'll build more. Where does that freedom of spirit come from? Right? I was going to say, by the rest of the world, often you kill us, we'll kill you back. Unfortunately, we begin to see the rise of that in some extremist behavior in Eretz Yisrael as well, which has to be condemned on every single level. That's not what we do. That's not how we behave. But I was saying that the ability to answer loss and death and violence with building and thriving and expansion, that comes from a spirit that cannot be conquered, from a spirit that cannot be owned. I always say, so where does it come from? The source for that is Gittin Lamed Ches Samad Aleph. Gittin, the first two words on the line. V'lo heim konim mikem. No one could own us. No one could own us. Incredible. V'lo heim konim zeh mizeh. We'll say, and again in non-Jews, right? They also can't go ahead and own each other. Yachol lo yiknu zeh zeh. So we'll say ultimately again. So I'm sorry. V'lo heim konim zeh mizeh. Yachol lo yiknu zeh zeh. So yachol lo yiknu zeh zeh. Ha'amrit lo heim konim zeh mizeh. We just said before. What do you mean? They can't acquire each other. Hachi kamar. V'lo heim konim zeh mizeh legufo. Or as well say, one akum cannot own the body of another akum, a guf. So the Gemara says, Yachal lo yiknu zeh zeh l'maisei yadav. You might have thought that maybe they can't own the earnings of one another as well. Amrit kavachomer. So that's kavachomer. Ovid kochavim Yisrael kona. Right? So ultimately again, so I'll say, Yisrael could acquire an ovid kochavim. Now we'll say, that's a kinyan haguf. Right? Kinyan haguf means literally physical autonomy. Ovid kochavim lakoshkin. So we'll say ultimately again, if a Jew could own an ovid kochavim, so bepashtos an ovid kochavim could own another ovid kochavim. Beina hanim mili bekaspa. That's only true by kasef. Aval bechazaka lo, but not by chazak, but not with chazaka, proprietary act. Amra Papa, 1 second. Ammon uMoav tiaru b'sichon. So we'll say here's what's interesting. Look at the nations of Ammon and Moab, which were overrun by Sichon. Right? I will say Sichon conquered Ammon and Moab. So you see the ability for one akum to overcome another akum. I will say, take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Ammon and Moab tiharu b'sichon. Amma ovid kochavim konem mechaveru karka b'chazaka. So I will say, so again, you see from here that one akum can conquer another akum b'chazaka. Ashkechan ovid kochavim. So the Ashkechan ovid kochavim Yisrael min Nalan dichsiv vayish mimenu shevi. So I will say there is the ability ultimately, as the Gemara quotes the pasuk vayish mimenu shevi, talked about one of the wars that Klal Yisrael waged in the Midbar, where a Jew was taken captive. So the fact that a Jew ultimately again was taken captive ultimately indicates to us that there could be some level of ownership of, or some level of autonomy of a non-Jew over a Jew. But Rabbi said, but it's not a kinyan aguf. It's not a kinyan aguf. Ultimately, again, it's a kinyan kesef, or we'll call it's a power over earnings. So I will say, so the idea over here, the Gemara is pointing out, just to fit this back in, the Gemara is trying to figure out, so right, we have this construct, for example, we have this construct where Ruvain, the original owner of the Eved Kanani, went ahead and had Yesh, right? The Eved Kanani runs away, Ruvain has Yesh, Shimon redeems him for servitude purposes. So I will say, what's the halacha? Shimon acquires him. So the Gemara just says, who is Shimon acquiring him from? To which the answer is, who's he acquiring him from? The captors. But could one Gentile acquire another Gentile? And the answer is yes. The answer is yes. Perhaps not in a kinyan haguf capacity, but certainly in an earnings capacity. Although the Gemara does give other examples, let's say by sichon, where there could even be an acquisition by chazaka. Okay, fine. Supposed to listen to this. If an Eved runs away from jail, so we'll say in this case over here, you have an Eved Kinani who was emancipated. Who was incarcerated. He runs away from jail. So we'll say, what's the halacha? So ultimately, again, he goes free. He's emancipated. We'll say not only that, we force the master to go ahead and write a get shikra, right? Write a document of emancipation. So we'll say now, what's the point of that? Rashi says over here, in order to allow him to get married. Right? So an Eved runs away, right? So we'll say, so it's three steps. Ruvain owns an Eved Kinani. Eved Kinani is incarcerated. Eved Kinani runs away from incarceration. So what's the halacha? Upon running away from incarceration, he is free, and we force the master to give him a get shikra. Incredible. So it's not Rabbi Shmuel says, no, ben kach ishtabed. So Rabbi say, this is the same Rabbi Shmuel Gamliel over and over and over. And you see what Rabbi Shmuel Gamliel is concerned about is creating a system where avadim just keep running away with the hope to gain their emancipation. So I will say, so the Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel says, therefore, no, even if he runs away from jail, ultimately, again, he's still an Eved. Any time that in general Rabbi Shmuel is on record in a Mishnah, the halacha usually follows him chutz me'arev v'tzidon v'raya achrona or re'iyah achrona. So we'll say, so ultimately, with the exception of three cases, which we're not going to get into right now, but a specific case of a guarantor, a specific case of that occurred in Sidon, and re'iyah achrona. So bishlam alabai. So therefore, I both say bipashtos that would mean that the halacha follows Rabbi Shmuel over here as well. So bishlam alabai. So according to Abaye, I both say now again, we're trying to fit this in to Abaye and Rava's interpretations of the Mishnah that we had on Zayim with Beis. So watch this. Bishlam alabai. Bishlam alabai mukila lahai lifnei yeyosh. He'll set up this brayz as talking about before yeyosh. I should say our Mishnah as lifnei yeyosh. And ultimately, again, behind the braysa la'achar yeyosh. The Rava da Amar the achar yeyosh kasha Rabbi Yochanan. I would say according to Rava, who holds that both cases are talking about after yeyosh, so he has a contradiction of Rabbi Yochanan. Amar l'cha Rava taima mai mishum dechizkiya. So I will say Rava's whole logic, I will say, is really based on the position ultimately again of Chizkiya. So I will say, so remember again, what's Chizkiya's logic? Chizkiya says, let me say it differently. According to Rava, Rabbi Shmuel Gamliel's position, right? Rabbi Shmuel Gamliel holds that no matter what you redeem the Eved for, he's always going back to servitude. Based on Chizkiya. What was Chizkiya's logic? Chizkiya said that we don't want avadim purposely running away or doing things out of some perceived thought that they're going to be emancipated. We incentivize avadim running away, which is not good. To which the Gemara says, listen to this. So Amar l'cha Rava, Tayam Mai, Mishum Dechizkiya. So we'll say, Boreach Shiny. But when a guy runs away from jail, and every guy runs away from jail, it's different. Why? Hashta liktala masra nafshe. Apule apil nafshi the gayasos. So I will say, at the end of the day, running away from jail, ultimately, again, puts a person in mortal danger. Right? Because if you take a look at Rashi says, L'ktala masr nafshe, k'dei lotzeis midei gayasos, shar borech min ha'asurim v'yodeh shim yasigu yihari. See, I will say, in apparently, at times of the Gemara, if you're running away from jail, and they caught you, they're not putting you back in jail. You know what they're doing? They're killing you. So if this guy is putting himself in mortal danger, Ultimately, again, do you think that afterwards he's going to put himself in mortal danger again and put himself back into, and allow himself to fall into the hands of other captors? Fine. So I'm saying to Mashmuel, so we'll say a story that illustrates some of this. Very interesting. I'm saying to Mashmuel ishtaboy. So we'll say Mashmuel had a maidservant. She was taken captive. Parkua l'shem amsa. So ultimately, she was redeemed for the sake of servitude. Vishadrua lei. Right? And ultimately, again, they sent her back to him. So apparently someone else redeemed the maidservant and ultimately went ahead and sent the maidservant back to Mashmuel. Shalchulei, they sent to him, Anan Svirlik Rabbi Shmuel Silber. We hold like Rabbi Shmuel Silber. Therefore, what they were saying was, this maidservant should go back to servitude, because as Rabbi Shmuel Silber says, no matter what the intention of emancipation was, Eved always goes back to servitude. So the Gemara says, Shachole Anan Rabbi Shmuel Silber At Inami Kirabanan Svirlecha Anan Lushum Amsa Parkina Nehela. So they said to Mashmuel, listen, no matter who you hold like, we just want you to know, we redeemed her for the sake of servitude. So because we redeemed her for the sake of servitude, she should be put back to work. Okay, so the Gemara says, so Anan Lushum Amsa Parkina La Nehila V'inhu Savar Lifnei Yeyoshala. Now both say, listen to this. So both say, so just to frame the case. Mashmuel has a maidservant. She runs away, or she's taken. What's Lashon? She's taken captive. She is redeemed by a group of other people. They sent her back to Mashmuel to once again be in servitude, and they send Mashmuel the following message. They say to him, listen, we hold like Rabbi Shmuel Silber, which Rabbi Shmuel Silber say in the Mishnah, no matter what your intention is when you redeem the Eved is always going back to servitude, right? And they said to Mashmuel, but even you, we don't know who you hold like, but even if you hold like the Rabbanan, just know, we redeemed her for the sake of servitude. So put her back to work. Meanwhile, what happened? They thought will say that for Shmuel, this was before Yeosh. Belohi la'achar le'yeshava. Rabbi say, and in fact, what they didn't know was Shmuel already had Yeosh of reclaiming her. So because he already had Yeosh of reclaiming her, therefore what? Ushmuel lo mibai di ishtabude lo mishtabid ba elagita di chirusa namelo etzrecha. So we'll say, so therefore again, because Sir Shmuel was after Yeosh, therefore I will say when she came back, what did he do? He emancipated her. I will say not only did he emancipate her, but he actually held that she didn't even need to get shikra, a document of emancipation. Why not? Listen to this, I will say. The Gemara says, Shmuel Tameid Amar Shmuel, Hamafkir Avdo, Yatza Lecheirus, Ve'eno Tzarech get shikra. Because Shmuel is of the opinion that halacha l'maisa, when one is mafkir, one is hefker, right? One makes their evet hefker, the evet ownerless, the evet goes free and doesn't require a get shikr. Now, Bosai, remember again, yeosh is effectively making an item hefker, right? When you despair of ever reclaiming something, essentially what you do is you make it ownerless. Shene'emar v'chol evet ish miknas kasev. So Bosai, Pasuk says, any evet ish v'lo evet isha. Ela eved sheyesh lo rishus rabo alav karoi eved. Eved she'in lo rishus rabo alav in karoi eved. It is only a servant, Rabosai, whose master has control over him. That's called an eved. But once someone doesn't have control over you, you are no longer an eved. So Rabosai, so this is really, if you think about it, this is a great case which helps to illustrate the nature of this machlokas. So just one more time, let's just look at this once more, because this makes the Mishnah come alive. So understand what's happened over here. So Shmuel has a maidservant taken captive. Another party, it was a group over here, redeemed the maidservant, sent her back to Shmuel. And they sent her back to Shmuel with the following message. We, the group number 2, we hold like Rabbi Shmuel Silber. What does Rabbi Shmuel Silber say? Anytime you redeem an eved, what happens? Go back to servitude. Why is that? Let's go with the idea of Chizkiah, because Rabbi Shmuel Silber says we want to disincentivize, so avadim running away, thinking that they're going to find some form of emancipation. But they send to Shmuel, we don't know what you hold. But even if you hold like the Rabbanan Mishnah, so what did the Rabbanan Mishnah say? The Rabbanan Mishnah made it sound like it depends why the second party is redeeming the Eved. Redeeming for servitude, redeeming for emancipation. we redeemed her for the sake of servitude. Therefore, she should be back in your service. Maidservant gets back to Shmuel. What does Shmuel say to the maidservant? What does he say to her? You're free to go. Why? Because for Shmuel, he had already had Yeyosh. He had already given up hope of reclaiming her. And I will say, not only that, so therefore again, he holds like the Rabbanon, it's Achar Yeyosh. Therefore she goes free. Not only that, she doesn't need to get shikhr. She doesn't need a document of emancipation. Why? Because Yeyosh effectively makes an Eved Hefker, and Shmuel holds that once an Eved becomes Hefker, no need for get shikhr. So fast, just an excellent illustrative story. Great job, Gemara. Let's go back to this. Says the Gemara. Am say Rabbi Abba Bar Zutra. We'll say another story. So what happens? There was a maidservant. It was a maidservant of Rabbi Abba Bar Zutra. Ishtaboy. So same idea. Maidservant of Rabbi Abba was taken captive. Parka hahu Talmudah. So there was a Talmudoin who went ahead, a Talmudah who redeemed her. L'shum isisa. Now watch this, an interesting case. He redeemed her for the sake of marrying her. Okay? So shalchu lididei iyeyos avdus shadal gita decharusa. So they sent ultimately a message to Rabbi Abba. Listen, if you're happy with this course of action, do me a favor, send her a get shikhr. Send her a get shikhr. This way she's fully emancipated. She can marry. So the Gemara says, "Hechidami, what's the case? Idem matzu parkila lama lagita dechirusa." Ultimately, again, if ultimately again there's the ability to redeem her, then Allah, why does she need a get shikhr? And again, ultimately, again, if it's not a full redemption for emancipation, then what goes get shikhr? So Yishmael says the olam dematzu parkila keva de meshadel gita dechirusa chiburi mechabri ahadadi uparkila. We'll say here's the difference. The difference was that because in general you see that there's the ability, if they thought that if they sent a get shikhr, they'd have an easier time redeeming her. Right? Why? Because I will say, again, it's easier to do like a charity campaign for a Jew than it is for an Eved Kinani. Right? So therefore, again, if she has the get shikhr, then Rabbi says she's emancipated. If she's emancipated, it's easier to raise money for her. What's the other possibilities? They don't want to redeem her. So Rabbi say could very well be that in fact this Talmudai did not want to go ahead and redeem her. Rather, he was happy to marry her as is. Once, however, the get shikhr was sent, the whole thing becomes known that she was a shifcha. I suppose say this is an interesting statement over here. But Mar said that an akum prefers the Jew, the animal of a Jew, to his own wife. And I will say that's speaking to the general immorality of an akum. Hani mili b'tzina. That's only true in private. Aval befarhesya zilu b'hu milsa. But publicly, ultimately, again, it would be embarrassing. So I'll say what's interesting is as follows. This Talmudai had an interest in marrying this woman as long as it wasn't known that she was a shifcha. The problem was, once the get shikhr would be sent, what would happen? The entire matter becomes public, and then ultimately it becomes something degrading for him. Fine. We'll say another story which helps to illustrate some of these concepts. Hahi amse dahab pumpadisa, davakara dahava kama abdebe in shi usura. So we'll say a very interesting case. There was a maidservant in Pumpadisa who was an immoral woman and was engaging in immoral acts with Jewish men. Okay, so we'll say now watch this. Amar Abaye, so Abaye says, Ilavdam Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel, kol meshachrer avdo over ba'asei hava kaifina le'lemara. So it's v'kasav lagite decharusa. So we'll say now, watch what's happening over here. So you have this maidservant, right? She's owned by Ruvain. She's immoral and engaging in immoral acts with Jewish men. So what happens? So we'll say, now, here's what's interesting. In this case, so Abaye comes along and says, what I would like to be able to do is emancipate her. Why? Because if she become emancipated, then what Rabbi says, she can get married. And if she gets married, she has a husband who's going to take care of her and help her to avoid this type of behavior. In other words, the assumption is the reason why she's engaging in this immorality is because she's not tethered to any type of relationship. So emancipate her, let her get married, and hopefully again she'll correct her immoral ways. So the Gemara says, so Abaye says, I would force the master to emancipate her, were it not for the fact that Shmuel said, whoever emancipates his Eved Kenani is in violation of a positive commandment. We'll say, what's the positive commandment? The pasuk says, "Li'olam bahem ta'avodu." Ultimately, again, you should keep your Eved Kenani forever. I will say there is a positive commandment to keep your Eved Kenani, not to emancipate him, not to emancipate him. But we'll say the Sefer HaChinuch says why. Why is there mitzvahs asay to not emancipate your Eved Kenani? And the Sefer HaChinuch is amazing. He says because HaKadosh Baruch Hu would rather that the menial labor be performed by an akum and not be performed by Jews. Right? That's it. It's als kavod Yisrael. Right? Honor for the Jewish people. That let there be a menial workforce of non-Jews. Ultimately, again, who do the work instead of Jews. That's the logic. So therefore, Abaye says, I would force the master. Normally, I would force the master to emancipate her, except for the fact that there's an assay that you're not allowed to do this. To which the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says, because of I'm sorry, I just lost the place. Have a card there, good. Because of Rava says, no. Kiha mod Rabbi Yehuda v'shemilsa di isura. So we'll say, listen to this. So comes along Rabbi Yehuda, comes along Ravina. Ravina says, no, the truth is in a case like this, you actually would be allowed to emancipate the Eved. Why? Because Rabbi say there are isurim that are happening over here. So the Gemara says, "Va'abai mishum isura lo, v'am Rabbi Chanina bar Rav Katina am Rabbi Yitzchak, ma'aseh bi'isha achos, shechatzia shivcha v'chatzia baschorim." So we'll say, listen to this. There was a case of a woman who is chatzi shivcha, chatzi baschorim. I will say, how could you ever have a case like that of a woman who is half shivcha, half baschorim? Shutfin, excellent. You have a jointly owned shivcha, Reuven and Shimon, right? Reuven emancipates his chelik, Shimon does not. So she is in this very difficult predicament that she doesn't have complete identity. So we'll say, I'm a base, v'kafu esraba v'asa baschorin. So we'll say, they forced the master to emancipate her. So we'll say, what do you see from here? That as much as there is a mitzvah's asay to keep your Eved Kenani, when there is a compelling reason for emancipation, we'll force that. So the Gemara says, "V'amar Nachman bar Yitzchak minag hefker naguba." And Rabbi Nachman said, what was the problem with this woman? The problem with this woman was she was engaged in immoral behavior. So you see from here, Rabbi say that although there is an assay to keep your Eved Kenani, Lamaisa, when there is a compelling mitzvah reason, you're permitted to emancipate. So the Gemara says, Hachi hashta hasam lo le'eved chazia lo ben chorin chazia. We'll say it's different. In the case of Chatzi Shefya, Chatzi Basran, we'll say the problem we have is, as they say, she's nishtahin nishtaher, right? She can't marry anyone. She can't go ahead and marry a ben chorin. Why? Because she's a Chatzi Shefcha, right? She can't marry an Eved, ultimately again, because she's a Chatzi Baschorin. She can't marry anyone, we'll say. There she's really stuck, because she does not go ahead and have a complete identity. However, again, hacha efshar demiyachid la la'avdei uminter la. I will say in the case ultimately that we said before, I will say, right, the case of the shivcha who was engaging in immoral behavior with Jews. I will say there is the ability to kind of enter her into a solid monogamous relationship with who? With another Eved. In other words, the Gemara is suggesting over here is there is another remedy over here. Besides emancipation, right? So in other words, when the only remedy ultimately is emancipation, right? It's an eirachinami for a mitzvah purpose. We'll do that. But when there is another remedy, then we'll take emancipation off the table. Incredible. So Gufa, Rabbi Shmuel. Call him a shachar avda. I will say, by the way, what's interesting is, you see from this Gemara, just al derech hashkaf, what do you see from this Gemara? The worst thing in life is to have identity ambiguity. Right? When you don't know who you are, it is almost impossible to navigate yourself forward. Right? I will say the worst state to be in is chatzi eved, chatzi ben chorin. Right? Who am I? Right? Am I an eved, am I ben chorin? I will say, what's the problem? When you have identity ambiguity and you don't know who you are, you cannot navigate forward. You're stuck. I'll say it's so true. As a metaphor in life, let's say I could be doing things wrong. Most of us are doing things wrong on a daily basis. But if I know who I am, and I know where I need to get to, and I know what I have to accomplish, I know what I have to fix, I'll get there. Masha'in kain, if I have identity ambiguity, and I don't know who I am, I'm a chatzi eved, I'm a chatzi ben chored, I'm a chatzi this, I'm a chatzi that. Right? So we'll say that the problem is, I can't really advance my personalistic agenda, because since I don't have clarity of identity, I also don't have clarity of vision. Such an incredible yisod. So we'll say, here's what's interesting. If somebody were to ask you, is it better to be a chatzi eved, chatzi ben chored, or to be an eved? So we'll say, before today's daf, I would have said, of course, chatzi eved, chatzi ben chored, because at least you're quasi ben chored. Not true. Better to be an eved. But why? I was saying, because at least as an eved, I know who I am, I know where I'm going, and ultimately, even if my goal is to become a ben chorin, right? Ultimately, I know what I have to get to. Clarity of identity, clarity of knowing who you are and what you are, gives you clarity of purpose, clarity of vision, clarity of direction. Masha'in kain, when there's identity ambiguity, I don't know who I am, then ultimately, again, you spend your life spinning your wheels in the mud of life, unable to fully advance your personalistic agenda. Incredible yisod. Let's go back there. So Gufa, Rabbi Shmuel, called Meshachar Avdo over Ba'aseh. But as you saw before, anyone who emancipates his eved, is in violation of a positive commandment. Shneimar li'olam bahem ta'avodu. The pasuk says you should go ahead and keep your eved forever. May say 1 second. My said Rabbi Eliezer shenichas veisachnes lo matza asara v'shichrar avdo v'shlimu la'asara. So we'll say, now listen to this. So we'll say there was a story of Rabbi Eliezer who walked into shul, and what happened? He walked in with his eved Kinani, and there were only 9 people. It wasn't a minyan. What did Rabbi Eliezer do? So we'll say Rabbi Eliezer emancipated his eved, made him the 10th guy, and ultimately they had the minyan. Now, you know what the end of the story is? He left during Kedusha, right? The Eved, right? I'm a regular Jew, so I'm getting out of here early, right? In other words, all right, I'm not staying till the end of this. When he was an Eved Kanani, he was staying the whole time, right? Now that he's a Jew, he's packing up from there as soon as he can. Right? So I'll say, Solamaisa, what happens? See, you see, what do you see from here? You see from here a case where Halacha Lamaisa, he emancipated the Eved. So, I don't say you. Somebody there's a mitzvah to say that you can't emancipate the Eved, to which the Gemara says, mitzvah shiny. A mitzvah is different. So we'll say, so what you begin to see, by the way, is that halacha l'maisa, there is a mitzvah, I say a positive commandment, to keep your Eved Kanani and to not emancipate him. But what you begin to see is when there are compelling reasons or a need for emancipation, either ultimately again for a mitzvah purpose, or Abosai, in the case of Chatzi Eved, Chatzi Ben Chorin, we do force the remain. It's actually Machlokes Beisham and Beis Hillel, but we pass on Beis Hillel that we do force the master to emancipate the remaining Eved piece because he's stuck. So when there is a compelling reason for emancipation, we'll force that as well. Incredible. Let's finish up. Tanrab, so the Gemara goes weiter. Tanrab Banan, Leolam Bahem Tavo, the Rishus. So ultimately, again, Pasuk says you shall go ahead and enslave them forever. Rishus Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel says it's optional. It's not obligatory. Torah is giving you maybe like an Eitz Tova. This is a good idea, but it's not obligatory. Rabbi Kiva says Chova. Rabbi Kiva says no, it's absolutely obligatory. I have a Dilma Rabbi Eliezer Shavalo Kiman Dam Rishus. So we'll say, going back to the previous story where Rabbi Eliezer emancipated his Eved in order to go out and make the minyan. So maybe he holds like the opinion that says the Olam Bahem Tavod was not an obligation, but rather it's a Rishus. To which the Gemara says, Lo Sagadai the Sanya Behedja Rabbi Eliezer Omer Chova. So what Rabbi Eliezer himself is on record as saying Chova, that ultimately, again, there is an obligation to keep your Eved Kanani and not to emancipate him, unless, of course, there's some type of acute need. Both an incredible Gemara. Amar Rabba, Bahani Tlas Mili, Nachsi Balabatim Minichseon. They both say, pay close attention to this Gemara, very profound Gemara. There are 3 reasons for which a balabas, right, one of us, loses their property. Literally again, plus nearly nachsi balabat minichsen. Say literally translated means for 3 purposes, a balabas will take leave of his property. Say, what does it mean to take leave of your property? It means to lose it. What are the 3 reasons why people lose their property? Number 1, the mafki avdayu lechirusa. Ultimately, again, I will say they go ahead. Number 1 reason is because they emancipate their slaves. They emancipate their Gentile slaves. Number 2, the Sairi Nichsaya B'Shabsa. They go out to look at their properties on Shabbos. And number 3, the Kavi Seudasaya B'Shabsa B'Idan B'Midrasha. They go home to have their meal during the drasha. Listen to that one very carefully. Listen to that, I will say. They go to make Kiddush during the drasha. Right? And I will say, now, okay, so let's talk about this for just a little bit. Did I mention they go to make Kiddush during the drasha? Right? So I'll say that is one of the reasons why a balabas loses his money, loses his property. And I will say, now, what's the pshat with this? First of all, let's just finish the rest of the story. There were 2 families in Yerushalayim. Achas kavas suudasa b'shabsa. So I will say one of them established him, and I will say, now literally what it means is, so just seriously, on Shabbos, the Rav used to give a drasha, used to give a shir, or somebody gave a shir. So I will say, remember, for Balabatim, Shabbos was often the time when they were learning, because during the week they were working. So I will say, so don't go out to eat, don't go out to drink, don't schedule Shabbos Suda when it's the shir. You have the rest of Shabbos to eat and drink, don't do it during the drasha. So the Gemara tells the story of two families in Yerushalayim. One went ahead and achas kavas udas b'shabsa. Shabbos is interesting. So one of them purposely went out to eat, made their meal during the drasha. The achas kavas udas be'erev Shabbos. I will say, interestingly enough, one of them, although well-meaning, decided to schedule their primary meal for Friday night, Shabbos night, to save their time ultimately again for Shabbos day. Shabbos say, remember, the halacha is the primary su'uda of Shabbos is Shabbos day, not Shabbos night. Their mistake was they made their primary su'uda Shabbos night and not Shabbos day. Shabbos say the primary mitzvah of Oneg Shabbos is by day and not by night. Obviously, you have an obligation to have a su'uda at night. But we know this in halacha, right? If you have, let's say, a delicacy, right? When should you use it? The ideal is to save it for day and not to use it at night, right? L'maisa again, because the primary mitzvah of Oneg. So 2 families both made an interesting mistake, right? So first family made the mistake of scheduling their meal during the drasha. Second family, in an effort to get to the drasha, scheduled the primary meal for Shabbos night as opposed to Shabbos day, and they made a mistake. And I will say, what happened? Ushtehen ne'ekru. And ultimately, I will say, both ultimately, again, were uprooted from their property. Both are uprooted from their property. Rashi says over here, Rashi says, "Bi'idan be'midrasha kishachacham dorish drasha shel rabim b'Shabbos then yoshem b'suuda favlam lahaktim o la'acher." I will say, don't go out to eat and drink during the drasha, right? In other words, have your suuda either earlier, have your suuda either later, but l'maisa, don't go ahead and miss Torah for the sake of eating and drinking. Next Rashi be'erev Shabbos, b'leilei Shabbos ve'im kan kavod Shabbos t'kaim alon kavod yom kodem lekavod laila. We'll say the kavod of the daytime of Shabbos takes precedence over the kavod of nighttime Shabbos. V'heim hayu miskavnin b'shil bidl beis hamedrash. Shabbos says, so again, they had good intent. The second family had good intentions. They moved the primary meal to Friday night so that it would not conflict with the drasha on Shabbos day. But that's a mistake as well. And as a result, both of these families lost their property. I will say very quickly, what's the pshat of these 3 things? In other words, whenever we see something that's in Chazal, if you violate 3 things, you go ahead and you lose your property. So I will say again, emancipate your avadim, go out and see your property on Shabbos, and and eat during the drasha. Eat and drink during the drasha. Shabbos say, what's the pshat? What's the common denominator? Shabbos say, the Ger Rebbe, the Beis Yisrael, says something amazing. He comments on the first of these. He says, what does it mean? He says, what does it mean ultimately? The mafki avdaihu l'cherusa. Shabbos say, we're translating it as, you emancipate your eved. Shabbos say, listen to this. It says the Beis Yisrael, get ready for this. All of us have certain things that we're supposed to keep enslaved. Right? Let's say we have certain desires, we have certain wants, we have certain lusts, we have certain proclivities, and what's our goal? In other words, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, often of us want to be clear, often HaKadosh Baruch Hu created us that way. These are not things like that I picked up, right, or that I want per se, but often there are things with which the Ribono Shel Olam created me with. What's my job? Keep it under control. Keep it under control. Make it your eved. Make it your eved. See, Rabbi say, when it comes to the desires in life, I have one of 2 possibilities. Either I become a servant to my desires, or my desires become a servant to me. The goal is number 2. Make your taivas, make your desires your servant. Shabbat say, what is Gemara talking about over here? What I was talking about over here, an individual, demafki avdayu l'cherusa. I will say, who's a guy who's mafki avdayu l'cherusa? I've set my avodim free, which means I allow my desires and my wants to rule me. I've emancipated them. Whatever I feel like doing, I do. There's no checks, there's no balances, there's no stopping, there's nothing. My avodim, the things I should keep under control, I've set them free. In other words, Rabbi say, I live without boundaries. Now Rabbi says the Beis Yisrael, that's the rest of the list as well. What's the Siren Chesay b'Shabsa? Right? Guy goes to see his property on Shabbos. What say? Have a whole week to work. You have a whole week to work. You have 6 days to focus on work. 6 days. One day, the Ribono Shel Olam says, keep it in check. One day, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, don't engage in business. Don't do it. Don't look at it. Don't study it. Don't think about it. Move it away. In other words, create a boundary. Create a boundary. I was saying, what's the third thing? People who go out to eat and drink during the drasha, right? Let's say, you have a whole Shabbos to eat and drink. And by the way, not only that, it's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah. So during the time of the drasha, you can't keep it under control. During that little bit of time, a person's unable to restrain themselves. So the common denominator, Rabbi say, is that halacha l'maisa, this person lacks restraint. He's freeing his avadim, the things that he should keep enslaved, he's letting them go. Right? 1 day a week, a person should control themselves, exercise self-restraint. We've learned in Piagetz, exercise self-restraint, and don't engage in business. You can't do that. Whole Shabbos you have to eat and drink. For whatever the amount of time is for the drasha, long drasha, short drasha, whatever it is, don't eat and drink. Can't do that. Can't do that. So we'll say, so what happens? So we'll say, so what does the Gemara say? When a person doesn't have self-restraint, you know what that means? They can't hold on to things. Right? They can't hold themselves back. Well, guess what? If you can't hold yourself back, chances are you're not going to be able to hold on to your possessions either. So you will say, it's not a punishment. It's a cause and effect. It's cause and effect. If I'm a person without self-restraint, if I'm a person without self-control, if I'm a person who can't hold on to things, then look at the Lashon of the Gemara. It doesn't say HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to take away your property. Rather, what does it say? Tzlas mili, behani tasli, nachsi balabat min chseyon. So ultimately, balabatim are separated. They're going to walk away from their property. Nachsi means they're going to be removed. So we'll say, because when you don't have self-control, you can't hold yourself back. You can't hold on to things. You can't keep things in. You can't keep things in control. So over time, that midah is just going to have an impact on your possessions as well. The power, Rabbi say, of being people who are in control of their avodim, who are in control of their profession, who are in control of their bodily taivas. So we'll say, that's it. Life is all about the ability to exercise restraint and to know that everything has its time and everything has its place. Work on that midah of self-restraint and a person will be successful, not just in the realm of the spiritual, but in the realm of the material as well. Let's go a little bit weiter. Amarav. Hamakdish abdu yotza l'cherus. Let's say a person who consecrates his eved, the eved goes free. My timer, what's the reason? Gufei lo, so the Gemara says, my timer, my timer, gufei lo kadosh, l'dmeid lo kamar, d'lehavi am kadosh. Because it's obviously because just by process of elimination, if I'm makdish my eved, I'm not being makdish his body, right? Because ultimately, again, the base doesn't need to own an eved, right? Ultimately, again, I'm not consecrating his value, because if I was consecrating his value, there are ways to say that as well. So therefore, by definition, what I'm saying is, when I make him hektish, so to speak, I'm making him am kadosh. What I'm saying is, you are part of the consecrated nation, i.e. you're a yid. Rabbi Yosef Amarav hamafkir avdo yotza l'cherus. And ultimately, Rabbi Yosef says, if you make your eved hefker, he goes free. Manda amar hektish koshkin mafkir. The one who said by hektish, ultimately he goes free, certainly agrees by hefker. Manda amar mafkir, but the one who says by ma hefker, aval makdish lo. But I will say, when a person is makdish his eved, maybe not. Ultimately, dilma lidmei ka'amar. Because maybe ultimately, also, what am I saying when I'm makdish my eved? Maybe I'm not emancipating him, but maybe ultimately I'm actually going ahead and pledging his value to the Beis HaMikdash. So I will say, so ultimately, again, halacha l'maisa, that's really how we pass him. So if you're mafkir your eved, by the way, he does go free. If you're makdish your eved, we assume that ultimately what you're doing is you're being makdish. Zayir, we'll stop over here for today. Shkoyach. What a daf. What a daf. All right, Chevra on Zoom. Have a great day, everyone. We're there, good Erev Shabbos, an incredible schus to be able to learn with all of you.
Can I ask my yesterday's out for a second?
Can you ask?
My yesterday's out. Sure. Yasom and Prizbol. So I assume that's like a minor child, a minor Yasom?
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
Like,
Correct.
Is that just, so like, it's not Yasom, so...
No, correct. Only minors we assume are not conversant, like in the affairs of the estate.
Okay.
Dr. Glenstein.